Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a wonderful program planned, and we are very, very lucky to have Dr. Blaire Moody Rideout, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions from Michigan's Ross School of Business, with us. And as people are queuing into the room, just a couple of housekeeping items. I'm Barry Norman, and I will be the moderator and host today. And thank you so very much to registrants who submitted so many questions in advance. We hope that we've got most of the topics covered for you. Please continue to ask questions, but use the Q&A item for Q&A, not in the chat ideally, and I will look through them as we're having our conversation and incorporate anything that we might be able to. But again, thank you so very much. Thank you to Dr. Moody Rideout for joining us, and without further ado, I'd love to get started. So Blaire, we were talking, obviously today's program is about business and undergraduate business in particular. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And we know it's a busy time for you and certainly gearing up for it, but we would love to hear, maybe to start out, so many of our students, whether you're coming from the counseling perspective or you're a parent, or for the students out there, there's a lot of interest in business. It's maybe arguably the most popular major or path that students will mention. And yet at the same time, it's fairly specific. And so when we speak to high school students about this idea of picking something specific, a lot of students will say that they're interested in business when you ask them because they want to make money. They'll say because it's a flexible path, they're not sure what they want to do, but they can do almost anything with this. Who do you feel, from the high school student, who do you feel should be applying to undergraduate business programs, and who shouldn't be?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When I think of students and I think of business and what we're looking for, I think it goes beyond making money. I think students often think of finance right away or banking, and there are certainly those opportunities to create wealth. But I really think what we're looking for in undergraduate business education are creative problem solvers. So, business is broad. Of course, there's finance, but there's many other areas of business. There's consulting, there's marketing, there's the business and tech space. We have students that go into nonprofit management, social impact. So I think for us, what we're really looking for coming out of high school are students that like to solve problems. If you think of business education, a lot of these undergraduate business education programs are modeled after MBA programs that focus on the case study analysis pedagogy. And so we're looking for students that can solve cases, that can provide their input, that can look at a situation, analyze it, and provide a solution. So I think we're looking for problem solvers. I still think problem solvers can go, work on Wall Street and banking and do well. But I think the core of business is broad. And so we're looking more for creative problem solvers more than students that want to make money.
Yeah, it's I think it's very tempting for a lot of students, and there often can be a push, sometimes from parents, sometimes, from the students themselves, to go in this direction. But it is a flexible path, and at the same time, you're picking something fairly specific as a high school student when you choose to do an undergraduate business program.
Yes, both true. Yes.
And to pick up on something that you mentioned, what about this idea, like, if you know as well as you can know in high school, but if you have a really good sense that you're going to likely be pursuing an MBA down the road, what are your thoughts about that, the benefits or the potential drawbacks of doing an undergraduate business degree?
Sure. So I think before I answer the MBA question, I often like to talk with folks about kind of that paradigm shift we're seeing in undergraduate education at these comprehensive universities. And what I mean by that is we're starting to see more of the professionalized undergraduate degree. So business has always been an MBA program. We now have schools offering undergraduate business degrees like Michigan Ross. We also have schools that now offer degrees, undergraduate degrees in public policy and public health. We have a School of Information, Library Science that was more graduate program. You can now do social computing as an undergraduate student in the School of Information. So when you think about that, and how you have historically graduate programs that now offer undergraduate degrees, That means a student coming out with that professional undergraduate degree, they don't always need the professional graduate degree. So our students, now speaking specifically to BBA, MBA, they don't always need an MBA. Do some go and pursue an MBA? Yes, absolutely. It could be a requirement for management at their company if they need to move up in the ranks. It could be a way for a student to pivot paths. We do have students that will go, and do one type of profession in business and then realize, oh, I kind of want to pivot and do more consulting or marketing, and then have the MBA as a transition point before they jump into a new field. But it's not needed. The BBA is a professional degree. A lot of our companies will hire BBAs because they can do very similar work to an MBA, and they can do that work right away. So it is something students don't necessarily need down the road. Certainly some students will choose an MBA for the reasons I mentioned before, but sometimes students will choose other paths as well, other master's degrees or even law school.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the idea of thinking a bit more ahead, like a bit more forward thinking, a bit more ahead and sort of long term as you're considering this path is definitely worthwhile, and not something that all students will think about
Right.
in the moment. And if we could switch gears to admissions and get in a little bit to the nuts and bolts and the numbers and sort of the particulars at Ross, especially. Applying to Ross is a little bit funky, for lack of a better word, relative to some other schools, in the sense that
Yeah.
at Michigan, you pick another school besides Ross first. You end up, you have to be admitted to that program, and then you are reviewed by Ross separately. Can you talk a little bit, just so that everybody is familiar with the process, and also make the distinction between LSA as that first choice and one of the other schools?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So you said funky. It's complex. Michigan is a large, comprehensive institution. We have almost 20 schools and colleges. We have different majors, undergraduate majors at each of those. So Michigan, because Michigan is so complex, we try to streamline a little bit the admissions process. So students have one of 5 choices for what we call a first year admitting unit that first year. So LSA and engineering are the big ones, and then art, music, and then School of Kinesiology. So those are the units students can apply to. For the Ross process, we're typically seeing students choosing LSA and engineering. Most students will choose LSA. LSA offers a direct admit option, whereas engineering, kinesiology, art, music, those other schools offer what we call a preferred admit option. I'll get to that in a moment. So the mechanics on the Common App. When a student goes to the Common Application, they choose one of those 5 first-year admitting units. And as soon as they choose that, another drop-down will open up and it will say, would you like preferred admission to one of the upper level units, being Ross? And I know that sounds a little funny because it's calling upper level unit, and we do have first-year students, but again, that's how they place things. So the student then chooses Ross for preferred admission as an upper level unit. In that statement there, it talks about if you are applying LSA and you're admitted to both LSA and Ross, you will forfeit your admission to LSA and you will be a Ross first year student. You can certainly still take courses in LSA, add on a dual degree or a minor. It's just Michigan has this unique concept of homeschool, and you can only be in that one homeschool your first year. So that's the direct admit option. Preferred admit, if you're admitted to both, let's say engineering and the Ross School of Business, you actually start in engineering that first year, but you're given preferred admission, that preferred spot your sophomore year when the core curriculum for Ross begins. You do have to do well that first year. You need to get a C- or higher in the required courses of first year writing, calculus, economics 101. Most of our students that are doing preferred admission will do just fine in that space. And then they're officially in 2 units sophomore year, which is when students at Michigan declare a dual degree and are allowed to then have 2 units instead of just one homeschool that first year. So those are the mechanics. I will say, if you go to our website, we have a lot of great resources. There's even, a video where we talk through the process. We actually, too, one of our admission officers, she recorded herself with her cursor, her mouse, like choosing the different units and how to do that. So there is a video on how to do that too, if it seems confusing for folks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you get at, though, is I think reflective of the institution, right? Like you said,
Yes.
Michigan is big and complex, and this is a way to kind of make some sense out of it and to get it more organized so that students know how their time there, especially the first 2 years, will be structured.
Yes,
Um, and getting to some of the stats, which I know a lot of people are very interested in.
of course.
How many first year spots are there available in Ross?
So there are 500 first-year spots available. So we enroll that includes both direct admit and preferred admit for a total of 500. The sophomore class is 625. We do add on 125 after that first year.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about where those additional 125
Yeah.
come from?
Yeah, the 125 is our transfer process, both what we call cross-campus transfer, so internal students from another unit that are looking to probably add a dual degree, maybe they came in undecided or changing major. We reserve 100 spots for those students. The other 25 are for external transfer students, maybe transferring from an institution outside of Michigan. Preference is given to Michigan residents that are attending community colleges. And so then that group of 125 is added on, and that's when the core curriculum, the cohort begins sophomore year, and they're in a group of 625 for the next 3 years.
Okay, so just to be clear, the external transfers from outside institutions are Michigan residents from community colleges, almost exclusively.
Yes, it's
Or
an access
exclusively.
program. That's what is dictated to us by our leadership. It's almost exclusively. We're not looking for 4-year transfers. We don't have it's more of a process where we want students from community colleges to enroll. And the bulk of this 25 will always be Michigan residents from community colleges.
Okay. And so if you're a student in another undergraduate business program and you're looking to sort of, as some students will say, trade up, or looking, maybe they
Yeah.
left Michigan and unfortunately weren't admitted the first time around, this is not a transferring in from another external
Mhm.
program is not going to be the way to go.
Right. 4-year to 4-year transfers often help with retention. If you're losing a group of students, then you're filling that group with other 4-year students, maybe from a peer business school. We're close to 99% retention rate for our students. So we're not looking for students from other business schools. We certainly tell them, think of us for an MBA program after you graduate when you have 5 to 7 years of work experience. But this is more of an access program for in-state community college students.
Understood. Thank you. And what about the admit rate for the students who are applying out of high school directly into Ross?
Yeah, so we do have a profile page on our website. We're very transparent with our numbers. So we admit each year about 850 students. And this year we had just over 9,200 applications. So that's an admit rate of about 9%.
And for those listening, I put in that link in the chat, and we'll continue when there are some helpful links if I can do that,
Thank
so
you,
that people
Barry.
can follow some of what you're talking about. And then as far as going back to those cross-campus transfers, those internal transfers that you also mentioned when you were talking about the numbers a few moments ago, what's the admit rate there? And can you talk a little bit also about the policy at Michigan where if you don't get in out of high school, about not being able to reapply?
Yeah, so the admit rate hovers around 20%. So data on the profile on the website right now is 101 students out of 482 internal or cross-campus transfer applications. And like I said, we have 100 spots for cross-campus transfer. Those students, though, it's not a reapplication process. So we want to be as transparent as possible. And I know sometimes can be a little frustrating for folks that, I applied out of high school, I came to Michigan, now you're telling me I can't reapply. And yes, that is the policy, and that's why we tell you out of high school, those 100 spots are not intended to be reapplicants. They're really for students that are changing their major, that came in undecided, or students adding on that dual degree. Like I mentioned before, Michigan has that unique concept of one home school, and there's many schools and colleges, and a student might want to add the BBA onto their degree program. So it's not intended as a reapplication process. What we do talk with students about, though, is if you're not admitted to the BBA program out of high school, now you won't be pursuing a BBA at Michigan, but we still really want you to enroll at Michigan. There's many ways to do business through LSA. There's many ways to have a Ross experience beyond the BBA. We tell students, it's a personal choice at this point. Think about, do you want a Michigan degree or do you want a business degree? And is that business degree where you've been admitted elsewhere to other business schools? And that is a personal choice for students, but we want to be transparent at the beginning of what their options will look like once they're on campus.
Yeah, and so I think that also touches on something we were talking about earlier, which is especially if you're interested in Michigan, first you do have to ask yourself, do I want to be at Michigan? Is that what's most
Mhm.
important, or do I need to be in an undergraduate business program, preferably at
Mhm.
Michigan, perhaps? But and then also really thinking, and we'll talk a little bit about the preparation that you're looking for BBA applicants, but really thinking about whether or not to apply, and because you won't get the opportunity if you end up being admitted to Michigan, you don't have the opportunity to try again.
Yeah. We always tell students apply out of high school because there are more spaces. We do have students that will new in high school, they wanted Ross and were admitted to Michigan, but decide to wait. And then they come to campus and they apply. And they're typically not picked up because, again, the students that are applying are showing most often dual degree students, not looking for just solely intending to do the BBA degree. So there's some, our cross campus transfer process, like I keep mentioning the goals for what we're looking for. And so it's not always for students that wait to apply. If they know they want a business degree, they should apply out of high school. It's when we have more spots. It's likely when they're more competitive as well.
Mhm. And I believe the admit rate, if you just look on paper, the admit rate for the cross-campus transfers is higher, right?
It is. Yeah,
But that's misleading. It might
it
sound
is.
misleading, it sounds like, because it's not where you have a 9% versus about a 20%,
20%.
but your
Mhm.
chances actually, you're saying, are better coming out of high
They
school.
are. Yes. We
Okay.
have more spaces and the internal cross campus transfer is more designed for dual degree students. Yes.
Um, and I guess picking up a little bit, you had mentioned if having other opportunities to pursue business at Michigan, should you not be interested in Ross, and you happen to have a number of options. Could
We
you walk
do.
us through what those things
Yeah.
are for the students who might realize maybe the BBA isn't the best option, but that they might be able to get what they need and what they want at Michigan?
Yeah. So, I like to start when I have this conversation. I like to start like before I started in admissions, I was an academic advisor at Michigan. And so I'm very much rooted in like counseling and talking with students and finding their way. So when these students that are not admitted to the BBA program, but do decide to enroll at Michigan because they want to do business through LSA, I will meet with them in September. I already have a couple meetings set up for some of these students, and we'll talk about, these are the options. We have minors. We have a business minor, an entrepreneurship minor, a real estate development minor. All of our elective courses are open to all students across campus. 20% of the seats in those courses are for non-Ross students. Michigan has a focus on the liberal arts and really a cross-disciplinary focus for all of the different units. A typical degree at any school or college at Michigan is about 120 credits. And at Ross, half of your credits have to be taken elsewhere. They have to be taken at LSA. They have to be taken in engineering. And that's the same for LSA and engineering. So when a student is in LSA, they can take a good number of courses at Ross. We also have a lot of co-curricular experiences. Our global initiatives program, they do a lot of short-term study abroad trips, and they save a certain percentage in those trips every year for non-Ross students. All of our clubs, or many of our clubs, are open to students across campus. And then, oftentimes I get questions about career resources. Our career center is not open to all students across campus, but the career center, each school and college has a very robust career center. And I love to talk with students about the fact that, if Google's coming on campus to recruit at Ross, they're also going to be at the LSA Opportunity Hub and, of course, in engineering. Similarly, for some of these large banks. And I have students all the time that will reach out, when they graduate to say, I wasn't admitted to Ross, but I want you to know that I'm now working at this tech company, or I'm now working at this big bank in New York City because of my LSA economics degree. And I just think it's great. I think the power of the Block M, the power of the Michigan Alumni Network really sets students up for success. So I tell students, if you're not admitted to Ross, to think about the power of that Michigan degree. And that's where the choice, really comes in to play for students. And then we'll meet with students, myself or my team, to talk about those ways to have a Ross experience.
Mhm. And on the flip side of that, is there anything that isn't accessible, let's say, to a non-Ross student? So for the kids who are thinking maybe that they might access it from LSA or another school.
Yeah, I think So some of the career counseling, like I mentioned, a lot of the companies will go to all the career centers, but they won't be able to meet with a Ross career coach. Some facilities things, so they can't reserve a study room at Ross, just like our students can't reserve, some at North Campus with engineering. So I think it's more related to facilities and some career things. Ross does have a really nice fitness center only for Ross students. So just some things like that, but there's plenty of nice facilities across Michigan's campus. Yeah.
I would say so. I think that we're safe there.
Yes.
And and also just to clarify, in case people aren't aware, at Ross, there are no majors, right? Everybody
Right.
is a
Yeah.
business major. Can you speak a little bit of just about the structure in that way?
Oh gosh, I love this. As an educator myself, that once taught first year seminars, first year students come in and they change their major on average at least once, a lot of them multiple times. And even students do as they, upperclassmen, then they go, oh, I'm sticking with this major, but I'm starting to take more of these courses in my minor. So I love the fact that we don't have majors. It's a broad-based management degree, and it allows students to really choose the courses that align with their interest. We do have this concept of specialization. So you can specialize in accounting, finance, consulting, entrepreneurship, but the specialization depends on how many courses you think you need. For accounting, you're probably going to need more like 6 or 7 electives. For entrepreneurship, you might only need 2 or 3, and you might have some other, specializations there as well. So it's a broad-based management degree, and I think it really aligns to, what employers want, and that the nature of work is constantly changing. So sometimes to be kind of locked into a very sort of prescribed major doesn't always align with the industries our students are looking to go into.
I didn't think about it from that philosophical perspective, but it makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense when you say it. It
Yeah.
actually makes the more specific degree more broad-based, and as things change, as times change, and as career places change, and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then a question that comes up a lot for students is they're interested in business. They're not sure which area. They're getting ready. They're writing their essays, and they think, I've got to pick something or not. And I'd love for you
Yeah.
to speak to whether or not a high school student, needs to know what area of business they want to focus on when they're thinking about these essays.
No, they do not need to know what area. When I think of high school students, we often ask our high school students, we first ask them, okay, what colleges are you interested in? And then the second question is, well, what are you going to major in? And that second question, what are you going to major in, always bothers me as an educator, because it's like, what are their interests, or what problem do they want to solve instead of what major? So again, going back to the broad-based BBA, a student does not have to know if they want to do accounting or consulting or finance or marketing. And if anything, sometimes it hurts them when they apply and they say, I want to do finance. And then they go and they list some, finance terms they heard about online or they read something about. We're not really looking for an exact area specialization or an exact industry. We're more looking for like an essay that is reflective writing on why they want to study business. Why does it excite them? How would they contribute to the learning environment? That's more what we're looking for than to list kind of a functional industry, because 17, 18-year-olds don't know what functional industries are. Not even our first year students. We have a whole course called BA 100 where we teach them the different areas, the different industries, and then they'll go, oh, that makes sense. So they're not going to know a functional area, and we don't want them to place themselves in a hole right away either. Yeah.
I guess that's why you're going, right? To learn about this.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I think also you hit on a good point, which is, and this comes up certainly with specialized programs like yours, but it actually comes up when students are answering supplemental questions for, liberal arts and sciences schools as well, which is this idea that, of course, trying to say what they think you want to hear, and also treating these essays more almost like a school paper or assignment, as opposed to a personal story or, something more, just, more specific to them. And
Yeah.
it's just good to hear it from you directly, especially even when we're talking about a program that is more specific in nature. But just this idea of kind of talking about yourself, your interests, yes, expressing and showing that you have engaged in business in some way without trying to show I know these specific terms, or I have all this knowledge already.
Yeah.
You're picking based on other things, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's storytelling on who you are. It's not telling me about business or the starting salary or that it'll get me a great job. It's more about why you like to work in teams. Why do you like to be a leader? And those are all things we're looking for. Yeah.
And what are the best ways for a student who may be, and there are great opportunities actually, and increase over time even more for young people to dip their toes in business, certainly entrepreneurship, certain types of things.
Mhm.
What are the ways that students can demonstrate that they've not that they just have an interest in business, but that they've actually experienced it age appropriately in some
Yeah.
ways?
Yeah, so students do not need to have an internship. They do not need to have started their own business. They don't even need to be in a business club, quite honestly. We know that, some high schools offer business opportunities, some don't. We're looking for more kind of the why more than the what. So a good example I always like to give is there was a student and all of her activities were theater related. But she was she was the ad manager for one of the theater groups. She was also reserving space for a little community theater group outside of her high school. So she had all this logistical sort of business related things. And then her essay of what she wanted to do, she wanted to work in media and entertainment, but from the business strategy side. It made complete sense. And so for us, it's more like, well, why did you pick this organization? And if you can really tell us the why, that shows us where your passions are instead of a student that picked a business club and they don't really know why, but they thought a business club would look good for their college application. So, I think it's a big rumor that you have to have started your own business or that you have to have an internship, at a business type corporation. um, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, again, the sort of the ties back to this concept of action-based learning, of collaboration, of leadership, of taking initiative, because those are the students that will be the most successful in our program.
Yeah, I think also sometimes when students do some of these internships where they work in some kind of finance firm or
Mhm.
whatever it is,
Yeah,
that they end up, what they get out of it is more like the what they did, and the why isn't there because the why
correct.
really didn't come from them. It was more
Yes.
external. And so
Mhm.
you end up, it's virtually impossible to distinguish between those students, right? Because they're
Yeah.
all saying either they did kind of the same stuff or
Mhm.
slightly different variations of the same
Mhm.
thing. And so it's hard to find one more compelling over the other.
It is. And one of the things I'll tell you, we have a lot of students. I think internships or experiences are good to kind of shadow and to learn, but we're looking more for where students can actively engage. And so oftentimes a business internship a student has in high school is more just learning. It's good, but we're looking more for active engagement. I think of an artifact we saw recently, a student who actually, like, we love part-time jobs. We had a student that was working at a coffee shop, and one of her artifact pieces was a screenshot if she had to respond to customer reviews in Google. That was her task. It's
That's
a big
tough.
task,
That's
yes, for a
tough.
17, 18-year-old. But if you think about it in business, like, she's interacting with customers, and she's getting more out of that. It was at a coffee shop, that part-time job at a local coffee shop in a very rural area, than maybe a student that's kind of sitting back passively and learning things at an internship. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a hard task.
Yes, yes,
Right?
yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
responding to the compliments and the complaints and in such a public
Yes.
way and being responsible for the voice of the company.
Yes, talk about
Um,
learning. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I understand absolutely. But I do think the why has to come from
Mhm.
within, as corny as it sounds.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's just so hard
Mhm.
to tell a compelling story about the
Mhm.
reason.
Mhm.
Um, and so a lot of people, of course, are counselors and families alike have paid close attention to the Supreme Court decision
Yeah.
that recently came down. Michigan, as many may know, had a law, a state law that prevented you from practicing race conscious admissions. So you have been doing this for quite some time. I still feel I need to ask if there are any ways that are different this year that you'll be
Mhm.
evaluating applications.
So tactically, no. We've been under a ban on the use of both race and gender for about 20 years. However, we're very concerned about the broad implications for higher education and the chilling effect this has on students with racially minoritized identities. So we're looking, at our outreach recruitment events and our outreach efforts to see where we might need to change to be more encouraging for students from certain identities. But tactically, from an admissions review, a file review standpoint, nothing has changed.
Okay. Um, and I know the answer to this question, but I think it will benefit, especially students, but even for counselors to be able to go back to families. A lot of people who have kids of the age of applying now applied to Michigan when it was rolling admission, and there was a
Mhm.
strong benefit to getting things in early.
Yeah.
But we're no longer in the late 80s and early 90s. And so I wondered if you could just share if there's any benefit at all to submitting an application in, let's say, August or September versus, let's say, October. We know you don't want everybody doing it, and there's no good reason to do it on October 31st or November 1st. But
Yeah.
there is a lot of anxiety and feelings like just get it in, and pressure of school counselors, independent counselors. I mean, just
Oh,
a
I
lot
agree.
of
Yeah.
anxiety around this. If you could just
Yeah.
speak to that, I would be grateful.
Yeah, so there is no preference or even look at application stamp date on an application. Readers don't even see it. I know sometimes students will insinuate like, here's my application time date and it's a day after I submitted, or what is my number I've been assigned? My friend got an earlier number. It's because, what does that mean? No, our readers don't see the application date or the timestamp. They come into their queues when they come into their queues. There's no preference for that. What I will say though, what you were just mentioning, just get it in, just submit it. We do start reviewing in October portfolios in the Common App. So if you get it in October, we're going to start reviewing, and we thank you for that. It gives us a little bit more time. But no, there's no preference to that. One of the things I will say to students though, don't hold on to it. Like when you're ready to submit, you are ready to submit. There's no sort of grammar check or other idea in your essay that's really going to change the full content of it. So just, get over it and submit it and just have that confidence in yourself. And then I will also say, give yourself, don't submit on the day of November 1st if you can at all. And I mean, our system is not going to crash, but what will happen is your computer will do a system update or something will happen with your own internet access. So it's always wise to submit whatever your guidance counselor suggests, but I typically suggest 3 to 5 days in advance of the deadline. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no good reason for it. And there,
Right.
by the way, your system, I
Right.
know Common App usually will have a glitch.
It will sometimes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just feel like whenever
Yeah.
you're doing something under the gun, there is a stress and anxiety at base. And then
Yeah.
oftentimes, you're not as careful because you are so,
Mhm.
anxious
Oh,
about it.
yes.
So those final, and people start changing little things. And then,
Yes.
actually a lot of bad stuff can happen there when you're doing things
Mhm.
under pressure with the
Mhm.
time, with the clock ticking. And so
Yeah.
absolutely, you don't want to rush to hand it in before it's actually in good shape just to
Right.
get it in. But then you also don't want to wait till the last minute. There's a happy medium somewhere in the
Yes.
middle there. Um, and if we could talk about, so at Ross, so you're applying to the University of Michigan on the Common App. And then if you're going to be applying to Ross, you've got this additional supplement beyond, let's call it the general Michigan supplement. You call it a portfolio. And we have an artifact, which we'll talk about. I think that word in and of itself, I think makes everybody really kind of uncomfortable with it. Also a business case discussion. If we could start, if you could take us through the portfolio review process and tell us
Mhm.
who reviews the portfolio,
Mhm.
how is it assessed? Is it faculty? Is it admissions folks? Like just
Yeah.
bring us through the process.
Yeah. And before I do that, I want to talk about kind of our reasoning for a portfolio. So our admissions process is really aligned to our curriculum and our values at Ross. And for us at Ross, we don't have many multiple choice tests. We don't have a lot of large research papers. We don't have a lot of like individual learning type pieces, which are like standardized tests or, research papers. We're going to do a lot of case analysis, a lot of group work, a lot of collaboration. Some of your classes is going to be all working in groups and you have to know how to grade your peers. It's a fabulous type of instruction. So because of that, our students sometimes that have perfect test scores and perfect GPA, but don't really have any leadership or extracurricular involvement are not the best fit for us. And we know that too from all the research we've done. So the portfolio adds that qualitative piece where we're looking kind of more at competencies that are really important to us. And so we have the business case discussion and we have the artifact. And the artifact is a very academic word that is given to us by our faculty. It's not something old in a museum. It's an artifact of learning. And so we tell students, and maybe I'll start there first. We tell students, you know, your artifact, think of your 4 years of high school and what are you most proud of? That is what you submit. And it also needs to show your learning in action. You have a 250 word small essay that accompanies the artifact. And it's not a play-by-play of what the artifact is. It's more a reflection of what you've learned. It's where we've learned about students that have submitted something where it was, you know, a paper, something that was really marked up by a teacher. And then they talk about like getting feedback and what it meant to them and how, you know, they've done better. I mentioned before the student, the part-time job artifact, where we saw her, how she responded to the comments. Another really cool artifact we think of, you know, we oftentimes will hear of awards students receive in admissions. They'll list it. Maybe they'll submit the certificate copy as a supplement or additional materials. But I've seen one time a student actually submitted the speech notes that she gave to win the award. And it told us a lot more about her experience than actually just seeing this award certificate. So we have a blog post and Barry will share it of actual artifact examples. We have an artifact or a portfolio website where we have two students on a video forum that share what their artifact was and why they submitted it. So the artifact, I actually think it's the piece, and it sounds really daunting at first, but it's the piece that students love in the end because it's open-ended and they have control over what they submit. And then when we say, think of your 4 years of high school, what are you most proud of? You see smiles. It's like, oh yeah, I know what I could submit now. The artifact is not a business plan. It's not something, it doesn't have to be related to business. It's not an idea for a startup. It's really something, it's nothing new you've created senior year. It's really something that encompasses your 4 years of growth and learning. And the first piece of that you'll see when you do the portfolio through Slide Room is the business case discussion. And that is an exercise in creative and critical thinking. So I've mentioned before, business schools are all about case analysis and solving problems. So this is a mini case analysis. So you'll pick an issue that is local to you, your community. You will tell us what the implications are, the business issues, and then you will provide a solution. We are looking through how you think through a problem. We're not going to look whether your solution actually will work. We don't know if it'll work, but we're looking for a solution or the steps, how you think through it. Now, when I say solution though, an app doesn't solve everything. A lot of times students will do really well, tell us what the problems are, and then they'll say, oh, I would create an app that would track this, this, and that. And it's like, no, think through it a little bit more. So again, we're looking for students in the motions of how they have creative thinking and how they have problem solving skills.
Yeah, I think again, going back to sort of the process and sort of not just again the what, but the why, and digging a little deeper, whether you're talking about a business case discussion or your own story for how you landed on this path.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, by the way. This is a source of confusion for so many people, counselors and students. I think people see that portfolio and do get nervous about artifact, and immediately, as you touched upon, think of an item like something three-dimensional and old and precious, and aren't necessarily thinking as broadly as you're speaking, or as personally necessarily as you're speaking. And even with the case discussion, again, heading back often into more sort of school kind of paper thinking and not remembering what the purpose is of asking this question and what you're trying to get insight into.
Yes. Yeah. And the business case discussion, another tip, it's not a research-based prompt. So we're looking for no research, no citations, no research. It's just, okay, this is a problem in my community. These are the issues. This is how I would solve it. Yeah.
And why do you care about this problem?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you take us back to the original question, actually, because we kind of got onto more specifics about the portfolio itself. Can you take us through the process of how they're reviewed and who reviewed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the portfolio and everything is reviewed in the common application. and the portfolio. And we have 2 readers that are assigned to an application. They review 30 minutes each. So it is a longer review. They do not review any of the academic side. That the academic review is in a different space because we don't want the academic review to bias the portfolio review. And then once those 2 readers do reviews, if there is variance, so if it varies by a certain point of standard deviation, we do variance reports weekly. It's sent out for a 3rd read if there is variance. And then from that, we have an administrative read, which will include folks on my team and also faculty members. So you talked about faculty. Faculty are the folks that have created these prompts, and they're involved in that process. And that happens at the administrative review after the reader review.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you said that Ross is seeing the Common App.
Yes.
So
all of the essays.
You're reading the main essay, like the personal statement. You're
Yes.
reading what I'll call academic interest essay for
Yes.
Michigan. Okay, so you're seeing all of that.
And the extracurriculars, the awards, all of the qualitative information.
Okay. And when you say that the academic review, I understand that the people who are reading the portfolio are not looking at that, but other folks in Ross admissions are.
Yes.
Is that just to clarify?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, there are. We certainly, of course, we have an academic review, but the portfolio goes through a separate qualitative review because we don't want it to be biased by the academic review.
Great. By the way, I can't believe 30 minutes. I think that might be like a record. Long.
It's long. Yeah. It's really intentional. I have to think one of the things about the Ross process, and I keep going back to this, is very much rooted in our values and our goals. And we want to review on academic information that is qualitative information, and we want to be able to give the time to do that. Yeah.
And I guess relative to the university overall, you do have obviously a lot of applications, but not what the numbers we're thinking for the university as a whole.
Correct. Yes.
I assume enables you to do that. Although I would still imagine it's incredibly challenging.
It is. It's still close to 10,000 applications. So it still is incredibly challenging, but it's something that we're committed to doing. Yeah. I think students, they're putting their heart and soul, and we should give them the time and really review it. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
And back to, there's a question on the Michigan supplement. This is different from the Ross, separate from the Ross portfolio, where I called it before an academic interest question. It asks about what you're interested in pursuing and how and why you'd like to pursue it at Michigan. If you're a student, let's just say, who's going to be applying to LSA and Ross, can you share a little bit about how one should think about that, since you're applying to 2 schools, one of which you may not be admitted to and end up in? How do you straddle that?
So this essay, even though it talks about including what school you're applying to, it says that clearly in the essay prompt. Students, I think, get lost too much in that and list, I'm applying to LSA and I'm applying to Ross. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. And then they list a major, and then they list a course they want to take. And then there's no focus on them and what they want to study. So students that truly have integration, like they want to do engineering in Ross, they need to really talk about both, but they're talking more about their desire to learn, what are their goals are, what do they want to get out of those 2 programs. For students that are applying, to LSA and Ross with the goal of Ross, they can still talk about business education generally, because if they're not admitted to Ross, they're going to do business through LSA, which is econ. And you don't need to list econ. You don't need to list finance or accounting or anything at Ross. You're talking about kind of what you want to study at Michigan, what you want to get out of this experience, and what your goals are. So I think across campus, we know that we're not as tied to a student like getting Ross perfectly right or getting econ perfectly right. We're tied to more looking at, it's reflective writing and what the student's academic goals are. And if it's showing they have a desire to learn and kind of a clear goal and a path. We also see essays, more so probably for LSA than Ross, that are just undecided, and they just talk about the nature of a liberal arts education. Might talk about, if they're applying to business too, the nature of an undergraduate business degree, collaboration, working with teams, case analysis. I still want to figure things out, but this is why I went to study Michigan. Yeah.
And just to clarify, so a student do you only read applicants who, let's say LSA has kind of pre-approved for LSA, or are you reading all of the people who come in, and then if LSA ends up taking them, it kind of connects there. Can you
We read them
clarify?
all. We have to, we start reading, like I mentioned before, in October. We have to get ahead of volume.
Because otherwise you would have to be waiting on LSA and you wouldn't be
Correct. We
able,
don't,
right?
yeah, you know, with the LSA review structure now, in the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, they will release their early action decisions end of January. And we want to quickly turn around 2-3 weeks later. So we have to read them all beforehand so we can do that quickly. Yeah.
And that was actually my next question. So it's usually end of January for the, let's say, general decisions. And so students should expect to hear from Ross 2 to 3 weeks later. So sort of
I will
late
actually tell them the
February.
dates. Yeah, I do a blog post. So I have a blog if anyone wants to follow it. In January every year, I have a very popular blog post and I'll say, okay, this is the date I'm going to release in February. This is the date in March and April. We're always Friday at 5 o'clock. So the students, you know, can get comfortable with that decision over the weekend, talk with their family members about it so that it doesn't happen, you know, the next day you have to go to school if it's a disappointing decision. And we tell students, we're going to tell you the exact Friday so that you don't have to log into the portal every Friday at 5 o'clock or be guessing or not schedule a family dinner on these Fridays because you think it could happen. So we try to be as transparent as possible. Like I said, I will have a very popular blog post in January that will tell the public the 3 dates when we will release. Yeah.
Great. Yes. And again, thank you for the transparency, especially with places like Michigan and the bigger universities, the rumor mill of last year, they did it on
yes.
this day at this time. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's a whole other thing. So that you are willing to do that is much appreciated.
Yes. Oh yeah. We try to be as transparent as possible. I'm a parent. I got kids. I know how this feels. They're not yet in high school, but I do know even the rumor mill, you know, with middle school and grade school. So yes, we're trying to be transparent. Yeah.
And so the students who would have applied under the early action deadline would be hearing on that February Friday date. The ones who are hearing in March, can you just clarify? Like,
Yeah.
a
Not
referral,
all
like,
early action admits will hear in February.
okay,
So we do not have a call to action, so to speak, like our central admissions office, no sort of guarantee. We also don't use a deferment to regular admission because we don't really have a regular admission process. So we will do admission offers in February. And I also too, I'll be pretty transparent in the blog too, and I'll do some updates throughout the time, whether we're going to release denies and if we did release denies. Most often the first round are admits, but it's not everyone from early action will hear from us because we need to wait to see the more rounds that are coming in from our central office. We do try as much as we can to get all of our early action students a decision by end of March if we can. In most years, we've been able to do that. Sometimes some students might not hear until April, which is our last round, but we do try to get early action students their decision by our March release. Yeah.
okay. So the first 2 rounds, you'll be possibly announcing it on your blog if there were denies, but mostly you're sort of admitting people almost on a, not rolling, but rolling.
It still feels rolling. It's rolling with 3 dates and we'll tell the students what the dates are. But, you know, in any given year, I have to really manage the numbers. So this is where it becomes hard. It becomes the funnel at the beginning is this very individual process for these students. And then it becomes more, as we roll out decisions, this very large process of what we know as enrollment management. And so I have to kind of decide when we're going to release certain batches and how many based on what we see coming in from our central admissions office.
Got it. Got it. But that's also helpful. So some students may get in March and some may get in February who applied in early action, which is also helpful to know that if you didn't hear in that first round, it's not because you didn't get it. You actually still have a chance.
You still have an opportunity. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Terrific. And we have to actually wrap up soon. I can't believe it. We often ask students what's unique about them. And I would love to turn the tables a little bit and ask you about kind of the notable characteristics of the Ross program and or experience.
Yeah. So the Ross School of Business is known for action-based learning, and we were modeled after an MBA program. We keep our first year class really small so that we can meet that commitment. So for students that are looking for undergraduate business degrees, you'll notice some of them enroll a class of 1,200 students, 2,000 students. We enroll our first year class of 500 because of that environment where they're working with their peers in a collaborative environment. We also have a core curriculum that is really unique to us, starting starting sophomore year, when students have their first accounting course, the same group of 90 students in that section are the same group in their first management course and their first marketing course. Because they do a lot of group work, they have to get to know their cohort well. So it's kind of like a homeroom model that carries them through. And then I think you got to think about Michigan and you got to think about Ross. And students really are getting the best of both worlds. The University of Michigan is consistently ranked as one of the top 5 public institutions in the nation. And the Ross School of Business undergraduate program is consistently ranked within the top 5. Students are getting the best of both worlds. And then add on to that, if you're a sports fan, this, community at Michigan, this Big Ten sports atmosphere, the Block M with the largest living alumni body in the nation. I just think you're not going to get that at any other institution. Yeah.
Go blue, right?
Go blue. Yeah.
And we always wrap up with our final question. I like to ask one of the essay questions, usually from a supplement of our admissions guests. And I would love to ask you the business case discussion question, if you would be open to it.
Yeah.
You don't have to give a full length, outline or speech about it. And if I could I'll first read the question. I know you know it, but for the benefit of the audience,
Yeah.
and I do have to say, bear with us. It's a little bit of a long prompt, but in such a wonderful way, because again, you are so transparent and you are giving instructions and direction in this prompt, which again, most schools do not do. But you do it very explicitly here. So again, for the audience, bear with me. I do want to read it in its entirety. And then if you wouldn't mind humoring us and giving a little bit of a response.
Yeah.
So, the business case discussion, this is from the Ross portfolio. Choose a current event or issue in your community and discuss the business implications. Propose a solution that incorporates business principles or practices. The review panel will look for creativity, drawing connections, and originality. Your response should be limited to approximately 500 words. And then it continues. This case discussion helps us learn more about your understanding of business. The topic should be unique to your interests, experiences, and knowledge. There is no right or wrong business situation to choose. It's truly up to you. We encourage you to select a topic that you are passionate about and not a global topic that you are disconnected from. God bless you, Blaire.
Yeah.
If you could, kudos to you for excellent prompt writing, which again is not a given and makes the transparency even less so for an already complex process. But if you wouldn't mind giving us your response to this.
Sure. Yeah. So we always tell a student to choose a local issue, not a global issue. And so for me, when I think of, when I was in high school in the 90s, I think a local issue for me was probably my school district and actually course offerings. So I went to a school district that was under-resourced, so much so that I had to transfer to a different school district for my last year of high school because they didn't offer any sort of advanced curriculum for myself to take. So that would be my issue, kind of, this sort of curriculum offerings at high schools. An implication would be it's tied to funding for schools, and in the state where I resided, it's tied to tax dollars. That's a business issue. And then I probably go through, a solution on how I would work to solve that, whether it be a reciprocal relationship for students to have buses to other school systems to take courses, why they can still stay at the community they've been in for a long time instead of to have to transfer like I did. And through that story, you'll hear then about my educational history and my context, that where the school district I was in, it wasn't very well resourced, how that impacted my transition to then go to an entirely new district to form new friendships, maybe, to have a gap in my extracurricular activities. But, learning something as I think now, I work in an education policy space in what I do. And so that's very important, so that's also as an adult why I'm choosing that. I don't know if I'd pick that when I was, a high schooler in the 90s. But one of the things I want to touch on here with the business case discussion is we want students to choose something in their community. When we see these global topics, like when we see the Olympics that are being held in a country where it shouldn't be held, we see these great essays about the economic development of the country and the impact, the financial burden on the country and the citizens. Or we saw one year when Pokemon Go was big, we saw all of these business case discussions about how catching Pokemon in different storefronts causes issues for consumers. Very business related, but not really specific to the student. If you go to the blog post, posts, you'll see more things that are very specific to students. We had a student in rural Michigan that talked about loss of community space and orchard that was going to be sold off and made into a commercial real estate development. And lo and behold, a Family Dollar was going to come in and take away kind of the sort of community feel of this local community. That was an issue. We had another issue who actually, a business case discussion where a student actually talked about a GameStop closing because he was a gamer and how it affected his community space where he'd like to go. A very typical 17, 18-year-old thing, but a very good business case discussion versus, about the Olympics in another country where you've never been to that country or never been to the Olympics. So that's what my tips for students. It's not a research-based prompt. Keep it local, keep something that is you're really passionate about. And business is broad. It can be education, policy space. It doesn't have to be something related to marketing, finance, or consulting. Yeah.
I mean, again, to reiterate the point you've been making throughout our conversation, this idea that they're not there to demonstrate their business knowledge, but again, tell their story via these questions that you're asking and the opportunities that you're given. So
yes, yeah,
really throughout the questions.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been a true pleasure and just extraordinarily refreshing. And I know that I speak for everybody who has been with us this evening, and that we really thank you and are grateful for the transparency. We need more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate the space, and thank you everyone for listening.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
Have a good night, everybody.